Market Ring 7 on Kesson Station was never truly silent. Even in the dead hours when most inhabitants slept, the orbital hum pervaded everything, a persistent vibration that crawled beneath the skin and nested in the bones. Willie had grown accustomed to it over the years, just as he'd grown accustomed to the perpetual dimness, the hissing vents, and the faint metallic taste that tainted even the most expensive filtered water. Today, like every day for the past 3 years, Willie stood in the food line. His gaze remained fixed on the scuffed metal floor as the queue inched forward. All around him, beings of various species jostled and murmured, their bodies radiating heat and unfamiliar scents. Willie didn't look up. He'd perfected the art of isolation within a crowd. When his turn came, he held out his ration card. The dispenser scanned it with a wheezing beep before disgorging a sealed container of nutrient paste, gray-brown and viscous, and a packet of reconstituted tea. "Next," grunted the Vordation attendant, her 4 eyes blinking in weary succession. Willie tucked the rations into his coat pocket and moved away, navigating the Warren-like corridors of Market Ring 7 with the efficiency of long practice. His translator credentials hung from a lanyard around his neck, occasionally catching the unreliable light of the overhead panels. The badge granted him certain privileges, slightly larger quarters, priority water access, and occasional shifts in the administrative sectors, where the air was filtered more thoroughly. Being a translator on a station housing 17 major species and dozens of minor ones meant steady work. Willie spoke 7 languages fluently and could muddle through another 5 with the help of his augmented translator implant. Languages had always come easily to him, even before everything else had fallen apart. He reached his quarters, a single room with a fold-down cot, a sanitation cubicle, and a narrow view screen currently displaying a simulacrum of Earth's night sky. Willie knew it was an outdated image. The real constellations would have shifted by now, continuing their slow dance without him. The nutrient paste tasted of nothing in particular. Willie ate mechanically, washing it down with a bitter tea. When he finished, he accessed his work terminal, scanning through the day's translation requests. Most were standard: cargo manifests, docking protocols, medical instructions for cross-species treatment. Nothing requiring personal attention. Willie preferred it that way. Personal meant stories. Personal meant connections. Personal meant the potential for loss. He was about to prepare for sleep when his door indicator chimed, a rare occurrence. Willie frowned, checking the security display. The corridor outside appeared empty. He dismissed it as a malfunction and turned away. The chime sounded again, more insistently. With a sigh, Willie approached the door and opened it a crack. He saw nothing at first, then adjusted his gaze downward. A child stood there, small, violet-skinned, with large eyes that reflected light like polished obsidian. A Lenari. The child wore clothing that had once been fine, but now showed the wear of hard travel and insufficient cleaning. Around her neck hung a pendant of twisted copper wire. "You are human," the child stated in accented but clear standard. Willie blinked. "Yes." "Are you single? My mom's really kind." The child spoke with startling directness. "You have to marry her." Willie's hand tightened on the door edge. "What?" "I am Leary," the child continued, as if he hadn't spoken. "My mother is Rava. We need sponsorship. You are alone. It is a good arrangement." Beyond the child, partially hidden in the corridor's shadows, stood a taller figure, undoubtedly the mother. She remained silent, head bowed slightly, one hand resting protectively on her daughter's shoulder. "I don't," Willie began, feeling the familiar tightness in his chest that preceded panic. "That's not how things work here." "Why not?" Leary demanded. "You have space. We sleep in the maintenance shafts. Mother was a singer before." She trailed off, glancing up at the silent woman. "Before everything, Now she doesn't sing, but she is kind. She would make good tea for you." Willie shook his head, already retreating into his room. "I'm sorry, I can't help you." He closed the door before the child could speak again, his heart hammering against his ribs. Through the door, he heard the muffled sound of the mother's voice, not words, just a soft susurration as she led her child away. Willie sat on his cot, hands trembling slightly. The encounter had jarred something loose inside him, memories he'd carefully walled away. A small voice asking impossible questions, the weight of responsibility, the inevitability of failure. He closed his eyes, focusing on his breathing until the tightness in his chest subsided. When he opened them again, he noticed his unopened tea packet still on the counter. Before he could reconsider, Willie grabbed the packet and his spare cup. He opened his door cautiously and peered into the corridor. At first, he saw no one. Then, at the junction where the residential corridor met the main throughway, he spotted them, the violet-skinned pair huddled against the wall, the mother's arm around the child. Willie approached hesitantly, stopping several paces away. The mother looked up, her eyes wary but not unfriendly. "Tea," Willie said awkwardly, holding out the steaming cup he'd prepared. It's cold in the maintenance areas." Leary emerged from her mother's embrace and took the cup with solemn dignity. "Thank you, human." She offered the cup to her mother first. The woman, Rava, took it with slender fingers. She nodded once to Willie, a gesture both graceful and restrained. She didn't speak. Willie retreated, uncomfortable with gratitude. "Good night," he mumbled, already turning away. As he walked back to his quarters, he heard Leary's clear voice behind him. "See, Mother, I told you he was kind." The next morning, Willie found a clean cup outside his door, the same one he'd given them, wiped meticulously and containing a small, folded piece of packaging material. On it, in elegant Lanari calligraphy, were written 2 words in both standard and Lanari script. "Thank you." Willie stared at it for a long moment before carefully placing it on his shelf. He should have left it at that. A moment of weakness, a small kindness, nothing more. But that evening, he found himself preparing 2 cups of tea instead of 1, and when he'd finished his nutrient paste, he wrapped the remaining third in a clean cloth. This time, he didn't have to search for them. They were in the same spot at the corridor junction, Leary sitting cross-legged as her mother braided her hair with deft fingers. "I thought," Willie began, awkwardly holding out the tea and food, "if you wanted—" "We do," Leary answered firmly, standing up. "Mother made something for you too." From a small bundle of possessions, Rava withdrew what appeared to be a folded cloth. She handed it to Willie, with the same graceful nod as before. When unfolded, it revealed a series of intricate knots along its edge, decorative work that transformed the simple scrap into something beautiful. "Mother was teaching me knots," Leary explained. "For memory, each pattern tells a story." Willie fingered the delicate work. "What story does this one tell?" Leary tilted her head. "New beginnings after long journeys." Willie looked at Rava, but her gaze remained lowered. She hadn't spoken a word in his presence. "Thank you," he said, careful to direct the words to both of them. "I should go. I have early shift." "Will you come tomorrow?" Leary asked. Willie hesitated only briefly. "Yes." And so, a pattern was established. Each evening, Willie would bring tea and whatever rations he could spare. Sometimes, if his translation work had been particularly well received, he might include a sweet gelatin cube or a piece of synthesized fruit. In return, Rava would provide some small token, a scrap of fabric adorned with Lanari needlework, a twisted piece of discarded wire fashioned into a miniature sculpture. Once even a handful of aromatic leaves she must have salvaged from the hydroponics section. Leary did most of the talking. She spoke of their home planet Linares, a world of perpetual twilight and massive floating cities tethered to mountainous spires. She spoke of the songs her mother used to sing, complex harmonic compositions that could make listeners see colors that didn't exist. She spoke of their journey to Kessin Station after the collapse, when the atmospheric tethers failed and the cities began to fall. Many Linari died, she said matter-of-factly one evening, weeks into their strange friendship. My father saved us. He put us on the last transport. He stayed behind to help others. Willie, who had been blowing on his tea to cool it, looked up. I'm sorry. Leary shrugged with the peculiar resilience of children. Mother hasn't spoken since. The healers say it's the shock, but I think it's because her songs couldn't save everyone. So she punishes herself with silence. Willie glanced at Rava. But as usual, she showed no reaction to her daughter's words. Her fingers merely continued their work, weaving a pattern into a scrap of material. Sometimes silence is easier, Willie said quietly. Leary fixed him with her disconcertingly direct gaze. Why are you alone, human Willie? The question struck him like a physical blow. Willie set down his cup carefully. I had a family once. They died during the Terra Nova colony collapse. The bacterial mutation, Leary nodded. We learned about it. It affected only humans. Yes. Willie didn't elaborate. Didn't mention how he'd been off-planet when the outbreak occurred, negotiating trade agreements. How he'd received the message about quarantine only after it was too late to return. How he'd watched from orbit as the colony went dark, section by section. So we are the same, Leary concluded. Survivors. The word hung between them, laden with unspoken implications. Survivors. Those left behind. Those who carried on when others couldn't. Yes, Willie agreed softly. We are the same. That night, he lay awake on his cot, staring at the artificial stars on his view screen. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to remember their names. Maya, Elias, his wife, his son. He whispered the names into the darkness, feeling their shape in his mouth after so long. The following week brought changes to their routine. Willie managed to secure temporary access codes for a sanitation unit near his quarters. He left the codes with Leary, along with a spare clothing packet he'd traded for with a supply officer. Only use it between maintenance shifts, he cautioned. Third cycle is safest. Leary accepted the codes with solemn gratitude. Mother will be pleased. She values cleanliness. Willie had also begun teaching Leary standard linguistic structures beyond the basics. The child absorbed languages with astonishing speed, her mind making connections that would elude most adults. In return, Leary taught Willie simple Linari phrases and explained the complex calligraphic system their written language employed. One evening, Willie arrived at their usual meeting place to find only Rava waiting. She held a folded piece of fabric in her hands, which she offered to him with a gesture that seemed almost apologetic. Where's Leary? Willie asked, accepting the gift automatically. Rava pointed upward, then made a sweeping motion with her hand. Even without words, her meaning was clear. Leary was exploring the upper maintenance shafts. Willie nodded, suddenly conscious of being alone with Rava for the first time. He unfolded the fabric she'd given him, a small square of deep blue material embroidered with silver thread. The pattern depicted what appeared to be a constellation, but not one Willie recognized. It's beautiful, he said honestly. Thank you. Rava nodded, her expression softening slightly. She reached out hesitantly, her slender violet fingers hovering near the pattern. Then she touched one of the silver stars and looked at Willie with questioning eyes. This one? Willie asked, pointing to the star she'd indicated. Rava nodded again. I don't understand, Willie admitted. Rava's brow furrowed in concentration. She touched her chest, then pointed to the star again. Your star, Willie guessed. From your home? A small smile curved Rava's lips, the first he'd seen from her. She nodded more emphatically. "Thank you for showing me," Willie said, strangely moved by this silent communication. "I wish I could see it for real someday." Rava's expression turned wistful. She gazed past Willie, toward the corridor's end, where a small viewport offered a limited view of space beyond the station. For a moment, they stood together in companionable silence, two refugees contemplating lost homes. The moment was broken by Leary's return, her small form scrambling down from an access panel in the ceiling. "Willie!" she exclaimed, dropping lightly to the floor. "I found a place where we can see the ships arrive. Big ones, with cargo. Some have viewing decks with real plants." Willie smiled at her enthusiasm. "Be careful up there. The maintenance drones don't distinguish between vermin and small Lenari." "I'm quick," Leary assured him confidently. "Did Mother give you her star map?" "She did," Willie confirmed, carefully refolding the fabric. "It's very special." "It's our home constellation," Leary explained. "The Dancer. Mother was named for the brightest star." She pointed to the one Rava had indicated earlier. Willie looked at Rava with new understanding. "Rava, the bright star." Rava's eyes widened slightly, surprised perhaps that he'd grasped the connection. She inclined her head in acknowledgement. As the weeks passed, their strange friendship deepened. Willie found himself looking forward to their evening meetings, planning what he might bring, wondering what new discovery Leary might share, or what beautiful creation Rava might offer. He began to notice changes in Rava as well. Though she remained silent, her posture had straightened. Her eyes met his more directly. Sometimes, when Leary was particularly animated in her storytelling, Willie would catch a ghost of a smile on Rava's face. One evening, Willie arrived to find Leary alone, her expression troubled. "Mother is unwell," she explained before Willie could ask. "She's resting." Willie set down the tea he'd brought. "What's wrong? Should I call a medical drone?" Leary shook her head quickly. "No drones. We have no registry. They would report us." She hesitated. "It's just memories. Today is the remembrance of falling, when our cities began to collapse." Willie understood immediately. Anniversary reactions. He had his own dark days. His son's birthday, the day the colony went dark, the day he received official confirmation that there were no survivors. "I'm sorry," he said inadequately. "Is there anything I can do?" Leary looked up at him, her large eyes solemn. "Would you sit with us? Just for a while. Mother doesn't like to be alone with the memories. But I'm not enough sometimes." The request pierced Willie's carefully constructed defenses. He'd been careful to maintain certain boundaries, never entering their makeshift shelter, keeping his involvement limited to these corridor meetings. But the naked vulnerability in Leary's request made refusal impossible. "Of course," he said quietly. "Lead the way." Leary led him through a series of increasingly narrow maintenance corridors, finally stopping at what appeared to be a solid wall. She pressed a hidden panel, revealing a small opening. Beyond lay a space never intended for habitation, a machinery alcove repurposed into a living area. Thermal blankets covered the floor. A small portable light cast soft illumination over the space. In one corner, partially hidden by a hanging cloth, Rava lay curled on a makeshift pallet. She looked up as they entered, her eyes widening at the sight of Willie. She sat up quickly, smoothing her garments with an automatic gesture of dignity. "I asked him to come," Leary explained in Lenari, the musical language flowing swiftly. "For the remembrance." Rava's gaze moved from her daughter to Willie, a question in her eyes. "I can leave if you prefer," Willie offered, suddenly conscious of intruding on their private grief. Rava shook her head slowly. She patted the blanket beside her, a clear invitation. Willie sat awkwardly, careful to maintain a respectful distance. Leary settled between them, her small body a bridge connecting the adults. "On Linares," Leary began softly. The remembrance would be marked with the song of descent, all voices joined together, from highest spire to lowest depth. She looked up at her mother. "Would you hum it, Mother? Not singing, just humming, for me to remember." Rava's face contorted briefly, with some strong emotion. For a moment, Willie thought she might refuse. Then, almost imperceptibly at first, a sound emerged from her, a low, vibrating hum that seemed to resonate in Willie's very bones. The melody was unlike anything he'd ever heard, alien in its harmonics, yet profoundly moving. It spoke of great heights and terrible falls, of beauty and devastation intertwined. Leary joined in, her child's voice weaving around her mother's deeper tones. Together, they created a harmony that filled the small space with haunting beauty. Willie sat motionless, transfixed by the music. He felt tears gathering in his eyes, not just for their loss, but for his own as well, for all the songs that would never be sung, all the voices silenced too soon. When the humming finally faded, the silence that followed felt sacred. Leary's small hand found Willie's and squeezed it. "Thank you for sharing that with me," Willie said softly. Rava nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. She reached out hesitantly and touched Willie's arm. A brief connection, quickly withdrawn, but meaningful nonetheless. They sat together in companionable silence until Leary eventually dozed off, her head resting against her mother's side. Willie moved to leave, careful not to disturb the sleeping child. At the entrance to their hidden sanctuary, he turned back. "Good night, Rava," he whispered. Rava lifted her hand in farewell, and though she didn't speak, her eyes conveyed what words could not. The next morning, Willie made a decision. He accessed his work terminal and requested a meeting with his supervisor, a pragmatic Terran named Yorston, who managed the station's translation services. "Sponsorship?" Jorston repeated when Willie explained his request. "For Lenari refugees? That's complicated. Willie..." "They have skills," Willie pressed. "Rava was a performer of considerable renown. Leary is exceptionally intelligent, multilingual already, and she's just a child." Jorston leaned back in his chair, studying Willie with shrewd eyes. "This is unexpected from you. You've always kept to yourself. 3 years on the station, and this is the first personal request you've made." Willie said nothing, waiting. "You understand the responsibilities of sponsorship," Jorston continued. "Financial support, integration assistance, legal accountability for their actions. And mixed-species sponsorship carries additional requirements, cultural education, regular status updates." "I understand," Willie confirmed. "I've been researching the protocols." Jorston sighed. "There's also the matter of their undocumented status. How long have they been on station without registry?" "I don't know exactly," Willie admitted. "At least several months." "That's a violation that would normally result in immediate deportation." Jorston tapped his fingers on the desk thoughtfully. "However, there are exceptions for survivors of catastrophic events. The Lenari collapse would qualify." Willie felt a flicker of hope. "So it's possible?" "Difficult, but possible." Jorston activated his terminal. "I'll need their full identifiers, biometric scans, and a formal declaration of sponsorship intent from you. And there will be fines. Willie, substantial ones." "I have savings," Willie said. He'd had little reason to spend his earnings over the years. "And I can take on additional translation work." Jorston studied him for a long moment. "This matters to you." It wasn't a question, but Willie answered anyway. "Yes, it matters." That evening, Willie approached their meeting place with trepidation. What he was proposing would fundamentally alter all their lives. It represented a commitment he'd sworn never to make again, after losing everything once before. Leary spotted him first, waving enthusiastically. "Willie, Mother made flatbread today. She traded with the hydroponics workers, spices for her embroidery work. Rava sat nearby, her hands moving steadily as she worked on what appeared to be a small garment, repurposing fabric with practiced skill. She looked up as Willie approached, her expression warming. "That sounds wonderful," Willie said, sitting down beside them. "But first, I need to talk to you both about something important." Leary immediately sobered, sensing his serious tone. "Are you leaving the station?" she asked, fear edging her voice. "No, nothing like that," Willie assured her quickly. "Actually, it's about your situation here." He turned to include Rava in the conversation. "I've spoken with my supervisor about the possibility of sponsoring you both. Officially, it would mean registered quarters, education access for Leary, work opportunities for Rava, legal status on the station." Leary's eyes widened. "Really? We wouldn't have to hide anymore." "That's right," Willie confirmed. "But there's a process involved. Questions will be asked about how long you've been here undocumented. There will be fines to pay. And—" he hesitated, looking directly at Rava. "They'll need to interview you, both of you." Rava's hands stilled on her work. A shadow of fear crossed her face. "Mother doesn't speak," Leary said unnecessarily, moving closer to Rava's side. "Not since—" "I know," Willie said gently. "I've explained her situation. There are accommodation protocols for trauma-induced communication barriers. But she would need to be present to confirm her identity and consent." Rava lowered her gaze, her shoulders tensing. Willie could see the conflict playing across her features, hope battling with fear, the desire for security warring with the comfort of anonymity. "You don't have to decide now," Willie continued. "Think about it. Discuss it together. I'll respect whatever choice you make." Leary looked up at her mother questioningly. Rava remained still for a long moment, then slowly raised her head. She met Willie's gaze directly, her dark eyes filled with an emotion he couldn't quite name. Then, deliberately, she nodded once. "Mother says yes," Leary translated unnecessarily, excitement building in her voice. "We accept your sponsorship. Willie—" "Are you certain?" Willie asked Rava directly. "It won't be easy. There will be scrutiny, questions." Rava nodded again, more firmly this time. She reached out and took Willie's hand in both of hers, a gesture of trust that spoke louder than words. The process began the following day. Willie submitted the formal sponsorship application, paid the initial processing fees, and scheduled the required interviews. Yorston, true to his word, expedited the paperwork and arranged for a trauma-sensitive interviewer for Rava's assessment. The days that followed were filled with preparations. Willie helped Leary practice answers to likely questions about their journey. He worked with Rava on non-verbal communication methods that would satisfy the registry officials. He spent his savings on proper clothing for them both. Nothing extravagant, but clean and dignified attire that would help them make a favorable impression. Throughout it all, Willie was surprised by the depth of his own investment in the outcome. He found himself checking his terminal obsessively for updates, rehearsing arguments to counter potential objections, even calling in favors from colleagues who might influence the decision. The night before their scheduled registry interview, Willie visited their hidden alcove with a meal he'd specially prepared, actual vegetables and protein, not just the standard nutrient paste. As they ate together, Leary chattered excitedly about the possibility of attending the station's education center. "There's a Vordation girl who lives near your quarters," she told Willie. "I've watched her going to lessons. She has actual data tablets and learning modules." "You'll have those too," Willie promised. "And access to the language archives. You could become a translator like me someday, if you wanted." Leary considered this seriously. "Perhaps, or a navigator. I want to see other worlds." Rava smiled at her daughter's ambition, though Willie noticed the smile didn't quite reach her eyes. She seemed distant tonight, her movements tense. When Leary excused herself to use the sanitation unit Willie had arranged for them, he turned to Rava. "Are you worried about tomorrow?" he asked quietly. Rava looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "It's going to be all right," Willie assured her. "I'll be with you the entire time. If it becomes too difficult, we can pause the process." Rava shook her head firmly. She pointed to Leary's retreating form, then placed her hand over her heart, a clear message about her priorities. "You're doing this for her," Willie understood. "For her future." Rava nodded, her expression softening. Then, to Willie's surprise, she reached into her pocket and withdrew a small object, a data crystal of Lanari design, its faceted surface catching the light. She pressed it into Willie's palm, curling his fingers around it with her own. Her touch lingered, warm against his skin. "What is this?" Willie asked, studying the crystal. Rava touched her throat, then made a flowing gesture with her hand. "Your songs?" Willie guessed. "Your performances?" Rava nodded, her eyes never leaving his face. The gift's significance wasn't lost on Willie. She was entrusting him with her voice, preserved from before her silence. "Thank you," he said, deeply moved. "I'll keep it safe." When Leary returned, they finished their meal together, talking quietly about the possibilities tomorrow might bring. As Willie prepared to leave, Leary hugged him impulsively, the first such contact between them. "Thank you, Willie," she said against his chest, "for everything." Willie hesitated only briefly before returning the embrace. "See you tomorrow," he promised. "Get some rest. Big day ahead." That night in his quarters, Willie inserted Rava's crystal into his personal data reader. The display flickered, then filled with recording data, performance venues, dates, audience metrics. He selected one at random and activated the playback. The sound that filled his small room was transcendent. Rava's voice, for it could only be hers, soared and dipped in complex harmonics. The Lanari vocal tradition involved multiple tones produced simultaneously by a single performer, creating harmonies impossible for human physiology. The effect was both alien and profoundly moving, like listening to mathematics given emotional resonance. Willie sat transfixed, playing recording after recording. Here was Rava as she had been, confident, radiant with talent, her voice a conduit for beauty that transcended species barriers. In one recording, a concert from what must have been shortly before the collapse, she performed a piece that Willie recognized as a variation of the remembrance melody Leary had hummed. In the performance, the melody began softly, almost tentatively, before building to a crescendo of overlapping harmonies that seemed to physically vibrate the air in Willie's quarters. At its peak, the song held a note of such pure, sustained perfection that Willie felt tears streaming down his face without realizing he'd begun to cry. When the recording ended, the silence felt like a physical absence. Willie understood now why Rava's silence was so profound. What had been lost was not merely speech, but an extraordinary gift. A voice that had brought beauty to thousands. The morning of the registry interview dawned with a station-wide power fluctuation, not uncommon in the aging orbital facility, but an unwelcome complication nonetheless. Willie arrived at their meeting place early, bringing the clothing he'd obtained for them and a small container of Yorston's prize tea, imported at considerable expense from Earth itself. Leary was already dressed in the simple but neat attire Willie had provided earlier. Her violet skin gleamed, freshly cleaned, and she'd arranged her hair in an intricate Lanari style that must have been Rava's work. "Mother is preparing," she explained, accepting the tea with a solemn nod of thanks. "She's been awake since early cycle." "How is she feeling?" Willie asked, setting down the garment he'd brought for Rava, a tunic of deep blue with silver threading that had reminded him of her star map. Leary's expression grew serious. "Afraid, but determined," She lowered her voice. She tried to speak this morning, just to herself. I heard her. Willie felt a surge of hope. That's wonderful. She couldn't, Leary continued, her voice matter-of-fact rather than disappointed. But she tried. That's new. Rava emerged from behind the partition that sectioned off their sleeping area. She wore a simple shift of faded green, her hair arranged in the traditional adult Lenari style, coiled at the nape of her neck. She looked regal, despite the humble surroundings. Her posture straight, her chin lifted. Willie offered her the blue tunic with a slight bow. For today, he explained. If you'd like. Rava accepted the garment, her fingers brushing against his. She examined the silver threading with obvious appreciation, then disappeared again behind the partition to change. When she re-emerged, the effect was striking. The blue deepened the violet of her skin to a rich indigo, while the silver accents caught the light with every movement. She looked like her namesake, a bright star personified. You look beautiful, Mother, Leary said approvingly. Willie nodded in agreement, momentarily speechless. Rava acknowledged the compliment with graceful inclination of her head, though he noted the tension in her shoulders, the tightness around her eyes. We should go, Willie said, checking the time. The registry office is in Administrative Ring 3. We'll need to take the central transport. As they made their way through the station corridors, Willie was acutely conscious of how exposed Rava and Leary were. For months, they had moved through shadows, avoiding official notice. Now, they walked openly toward the very authorities they'd been evading. In the transport capsule, Leary pressed close to her mother's side, suddenly shy in the presence of so many strangers. Rava kept one hand on her daughter's shoulder, her gaze fixed straight ahead. Willie stood protectively near them, aware of the curious glances they attracted. A human traveling with Lenari companions was unusual enough to draw attention. The administrative ring presented a stark contrast to the utilitarian corridors of Market Ring 7. Here, the lighting was brighter, the air noticeably fresher, surfaces gleamed with regular cleaning, and uniformed personnel moved purposefully between offices. The registry desk was staffed by a Terran woman, whose efficiency was evident in her crisp movements as she processed their identification data. Sponsorship application, refugee status consideration, undocumented residence regularization, she recited, scanning the file. Interview room 4. The registry official will be with you shortly. They waited in a sterile anteroom. The only sound, the soft hum of air circulation, and the occasional muted conversation from behind closed doors. Leary sat between Willie and Rava, swinging her legs nervously. Rava remained perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, but Willie could sense her growing anxiety. After what seemed an eternity, a door slid open and a tall, thin man emerged. Applicants for file RS-7294, he called, consulting his datapad. Please enter. The interview room was minimally furnished. A table, several chairs, recording equipment. The registry official, who introduced himself as Administrator Talon, gestured for them to be seated. This is an unusual case, he began without preamble, activating his data display. Human sponsorship of Lenari refugees. Undocumented residence for... He consulted the file. Approximately 8 standard months. Application for retroactive asylum status. He looked up, his gaze sharp. Why approach us now, after so long in hiding? Willie leaned forward. The circumstances of their arrival were traumatic. They needed time to recover, to establish safety. I'm offering sponsorship now because I believe in their potential contribution to station society. Administrator Talon turned his attention to Leary. Young one, how did you and your mother come to be on Kesson Station? Leary straightened, just as they'd practiced. We fled Lenaris during the collapse. Our transport was damaged. We transferred to a cargo vessel bound for Kesson. They couldn't register us properly. Their systems were outdated. By the time we arrived, the captain said it was too late to file arrival documents. And you've been living in unassigned spaces since then? Leary nodded. Yes, sir, in maintenance sections of Market Ring 7. How have you sustained yourselves? The question seemed casual, but Willie recognized the trap. Undocumented residents typically resorted to illegal activities to survive. Mother makes things, Leary answered proudly. Decorative work, repairs. She trades her skills for food and necessities. And recently, Translator Willis has been helping us. Administrator Talon made a notation, then turned to Rava. His expression softened slightly. Madam, I understand you experience communication difficulties as a result of trauma. Is that correct? Rava nodded, her face carefully composed. For the record, can you confirm your identity as Rava of House Talassi, formerly of Linares Central Spire? Another nod, firm and deliberate. And you consent to this sponsorship arrangement with Translator Willis? A third nod, accompanied by a gesture toward Willie that conveyed her trust. Administrator Talon studied her for a long moment. The file indicates you were a vocal performer of some renown on Linares. Is that accurate? Rava's composure faltered slightly. Her hands trembled in her lap. She nodded once more, the movement stiff. I understand this is difficult, Administrator Talon said, his tone gentler than before. But I need to establish that your silence is trauma-induced, not deceptive. Would you be willing to attempt speech, just a single word, to confirm? Willie started to object, but Rava raised a hand to stop him. She closed her eyes briefly, gathering herself. When she opened them, she looked directly at the administrator. Her lips parted, but no sound emerged. She tried again, her throat working visibly. Still nothing. Leary reached for her mother's hand. It's all right, Mother. You don't have to. Administrator Talon sighed. I am afraid for refugee status confirmation. We do need some verification of traumatic response versus intentional. Vaughn. The single word, barely audible, silenced the room. Rava's voice, unused for so long, was rough, the sound seeming to scrape its way free from her throat. Vaughn, she repeated, slightly stronger. Tears spilled down her cheeks. My husband, he stayed, to help others. Her voice broke on the final word. Administrator Talon sat back, visibly moved. Thank you, Madam Talassi. That's sufficient. He turned to his datapad, making several entries. I believe we have enough to proceed with provisional approval, pending final security clearance and medical screening. The remainder of the interview passed in a blur of procedural questions and biometric scans. Throughout, Willie remained hyper-aware of Rava, the trembling of her hands, the rigid control she maintained over her features, the occasional tear she would quickly brush away. When they were finally dismissed, with instructions to return in 3 days for final processing, Willie guided them to a quiet alcove away from the administrative offices. Leary practically vibrated with excitement. We did it, she exclaimed. We're going to be official. Rava managed a small smile for her daughter's benefit. But Willie could see she was exhausted, the emotional toll of the day etched in the lines of her face. Let's get you both back, he suggested gently. You need rest. They returned to Market Ring 7 in silence, each absorbed in private thoughts. At the entrance to their hidden sanctuary, Willie prepared to leave them to their privacy. I'll check the status tomorrow, he promised. Everything went well. Talon was impressed. Leary hugged him quickly. Thank you, Willie. See you tomorrow. She disappeared inside, leaving Willie and Rava alone in the corridor. For a moment, neither moved. Then Rava stepped closer, her dark eyes searching his face. She lifted a hand to his cheek, a feather-light touch that conveyed more than words could have. Vaughn would be proud, Willie said softly, of both of you. How you've survived, how you've protected Leary. Rava's expression crumpled briefly. She shook her head, a gesture of disagreement or perhaps simple grief. He would, Willie insisted gently. You've been so strong. Rava closed her eyes, tears spilling down her cheeks. When she opened them again, something had shifted in her gaze, a decision made, a barrier crossed. Not strong, she whispered, the words barely audible. Afraid, always afraid. Willie's breath caught. To hear her speak again, to him, was a gift he hadn't expected. Fear and strength often go together, he offered. You've kept Leary safe, given her hope. Rava shook her head again. Failing her. She needs more than hiding, more than silence. She touched her throat. My voice, gone. My songs, gone. What am I now? The naked vulnerability in her question pierced Willie to his core. You're Rava, he said simply. Mother of Leary, survivor of Linares, creator of beauty. He gestured to the blue tunic she wore. The bright star. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. And you? Who are you? Willie of Earth? Why help us? The question caught him off guard. Who was he now? After years of careful isolation, after deliberately numbing himself to connection. I'm not sure anymore, he admitted. For a long time, I was just surviving, like you, afraid to care again. And now? Rava's voice grew stronger with each word, as if the very act of speaking was restoring something vital within her. Willie considered the question seriously. Now I think, maybe survival isn't enough. Maybe we're meant for more than just enduring loss. Rava nodded slowly, understanding in her eyes. The Linari have a saying, to sing alone is to sing half a song. I like that, Willie said softly. They stood together in the dim corridor, the moment stretching between them, fragile, meaningful, full of possibility. Rest now, Willie finally said. Tomorrow will bring new challenges. Rava nodded. Before turning to go, she leaned forward and pressed her forehead briefly against his, a traditional Linari gesture of deep trust. Then she was gone, disappearing into the hidden sanctuary where Leary waited. Willie walked back to his quarters in a daze, his mind replaying Rava's words, the touch of her hand, the weight of what had transpired between them. For the first time in years, he felt fully present in his own life, not merely going through the motions of existence, but actively participating in it. The 3 days until their final registry appointment passed in a flurry of preparations. Willie secured temporary quarters for Rava and Leary, not spacious, but legitimate, with proper sanitation facilities and sleeping platforms. He arranged for basic necessities to be delivered, clothing, food preparation equipment, personal items, using his translation credentials. He registered Leary for preliminary educational assessment and began inquiries about performance opportunities for Rava, should she wish to pursue them eventually. Throughout it all, Rava spoke more frequently, never at length, and only in Willie's presence. But each word seemed to come more easily than the last. She confided that she'd been practicing in private, working to reclaim what trauma had stolen from her. Not my songs, not yet, she explained one evening as they sat together while Leary explored their new quarters. But words, simple words. The songs will come when they're ready, Willie assured her. There's no rush. Rava nodded, her expression thoughtful. On Linares, silence was punishment. To be voiceless meant to be outside community. She touched her throat. I punished myself for surviving when Vaughn did not, when so many did not. Willie understood completely. I did the same, isolated myself, refused connection. Until Leary found you, Rava said, a hint of amusement warming her voice. Willie smiled at the memory. She's very persuasive. She is her father's daughter, Rava said softly. Direct, fearless. A shadow crossed her face. I worry she forgets him. It has been so long. Tell her stories, Willie suggested. Not just of the collapse, but of before. Happy memories. Who he was. What he loved. Rava considered this, then nodded slowly. Yes, this is wise. She looked at Willie directly. Will you help me? To find words when they hide from me? Of course, Willie promised. Whatever you need. The day of their final registry appointment arrived. This time, they were met not by Administrator Talon, but by a junior clerk who processed their documentation with brisk efficiency. Sponsorship approved. Refugee status confirmed. Residence assignment, Sector 12B, Unit 47. The clerk handed Willie an access chip. Provisional work authorization for both adults. Educational assessment scheduled for the minor. Health screening next week. She stamped the final form with a decisive thump. Welcome to Kesson Station. Official capacity. Leary bounced on her toes, barely containing her excitement as they left the administrative offices. We're real now. We exist. Rava laughed, a sound so unexpected and beautiful that both Willie and Leary stopped to stare at her. She covered her mouth, momentarily self-conscious, then lowered her hand, letting the smile remain. Yes, she agreed softly. We exist. Their new quarters in Sector 12B were modest by station standards, but luxurious compared to their hidden alcove in the maintenance sections. A main living area, 2 small sleeping chambers, a proper sanitation unit with recycled water allocation, and a tiny food preparation nook. Most precious of all, a small viewport that offered a glimpse of the stars beyond the station. Leary immediately claimed one of the sleeping chambers, arranging their few possessions with the seriousness of a child establishing territory. Rava moved more slowly through the space, touching surfaces, testing the quality of light from the adjustable panels, examining the environmental controls. It's not much, Willie said, suddenly worried that the reality might fall short of their expectations. But it's a start. We can improve things gradually. Rava turned to him, her expression serene. It is more than I dreamed possible. She gestured to the viewport. Stars. Real stars. Willie followed her gaze to the small patch of space, visible through the transparent panel. You can see different constellations from different viewports around the station. Some nights, when the rotation aligns, you can even see distant nebulae. I would like to see them, Rava said. All of them, eventually. We will, Willie promised. The we slipped out naturally, without conscious thought. Rava heard it too. She turned to him, a question in her eyes. You speak of we. Does this mean you will stay? With us? The directness of the question, so like Leary's approach that first night, made Willie smile despite his nervousness. If you want me to, he said simply. I'd like to. Before Rava could respond, Leary emerged from her exploration of the sleeping chambers. Willie, will you live here too? There's another room. Willie looked to Rava, leaving the decision in her hands. She considered him for a long moment, her dark eyes unreadable. Then she smiled, a full, radiant expression that transformed her face. Yes, she said, her voice stronger than he'd yet heard it. Willie will stay, if he wishes. I wish, Willie confirmed, his heart lighter than it had been in years. Leary let out a whoop of joy and launched herself at Willie, wrapping her arms around his waist. I knew it. I told you he was kind, Mother. I told you he would help us. Rava's smile turned wistful. You did, little one, from the very beginning. Later that evening, after Leary had finally exhausted herself with excitement and fallen asleep in her new chamber, Willie and Rava sat together by the viewport. The lights were dimmed, allowing the starlight to fill the room with a soft, silvery glow. I have something for you, Willie said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small object, a data crystal, similar to the one Rava had given him, but of Terran design. It's not much, but Rava accepted it curiously. What is it? Stories, Willie explained. About Earth, about Terra Nova, about my family. He hesitated. I recorded them. Last night. I thought, if I'm going to be part of your lives, you should know who I was. Who I am. Rava cradled the crystal carefully, recognizing the significance of the gift. Thank you, she said softly. I will listen and understand. They sat in companionable silence, watching the slow drift of stars beyond the viewport. After a while, Rava spoke again, her voice thoughtful. Leary asked me something today. Something difficult. What was that? Willie prompted when she didn't continue. A smile touched Rava's lips. She asked if you would be her new father. She glanced at Willie, gauging his reaction. I told her that was not a question for me to answer. Willie's heart raced. And what do you think about that question? Rava turned to face him fully. I think that we have all lost much. That grief never truly leaves us. She reached out and took his hand in hers. But I also think that hearts can expand, that new love does not erase old love. It builds upon it. New love, Willie repeated softly. Yes, Rava confirmed. If you are willing. Willie interlaced his fingers with hers. More than willing. Grateful. Honored. Rava smiled, squeezing his hand gently. Then we begin, not as replacements for what was lost, but as something new, something chosen. Something chosen, Willie agreed. I like that. When Leary found them the next morning, they were still by the viewport, hands clasped, heads tilted together in quiet conversation. She observed them silently for a moment, a satisfied smile spreading across her small face. Good morning, she announced, making her presence known. I'm hungry. Can we have flatbread and tea? Willie laughed, rising to his feet. Flatbread and tea it is. As they prepared their first breakfast together in their new home, Leary watched them with bright, observant eyes. Finally, as they sat down to eat, she asked the question that had clearly been on her mind. Now that we're a family, she began matter-of-factly. Could I perhaps have a sibling someday? Willie choked on his tea. Rava's eyes widened in surprise. Leary, she admonished gently. Such questions are private matters between adults. Leary shrugged, unrepentant. I'm just asking. I think it would be nice. Someone to explore the station with. Willie and Rava exchanged glances. Embarrassed, amused, and perhaps just a little bit contemplative. Let's focus on the present for now, Willie suggested diplomatically. There's already so much new to enjoy. Leary seemed to accept this answer, turning her attention to her flatbread. But as she ate, she hummed softly to herself, a Lenari melody that spoke of new beginnings after long journeys. Outside their viewport, Kesson Station continued its slow rotation, carrying them all through the vast darkness of space. But within their small quarters, a light had kindled, fragile perhaps, but growing stronger with each shared moment. A light made of chosen connections, of trust freely given, of voices reclaimed and stories shared. A light called home.